sounds interesting. Hey, just want to call out real quickly, what a great venue. What a great day. It's good to see everybody. It's good to be back in New York City. I would submit this is probably the best venue that NEDAS has been in, and hopefully it's been a good day for you so far with good networking, and I believe that we're bringing together some really super smart people in the industry to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I think that, like many of you, I'm fully aware that in next week would mark the 17th anniversary of the attacks on our country on September 11th. And I think you're probably also aware that it also marks the one-year anniversary from the shootings at Mandalay Bay, and they both inform certain things about public safety. One, 9/11 was about interoperability and communication, and I would submit that in a lot of ways Mandalay Bay was about location. And so we have an opportunity here today with our panelists to wrestle with some of those things. And we've presented, I have, John Foley, other panelists here today have presented on public safety before. And we've presented some ideas that public safety is not necessarily just about the first responders. Obviously, we need to ensure that the first responders are able to communicate successfully with one another inside and outside of the building, at the command post, as well as inside the building. But there's that other element of public safety, which is the general public in public safety. And it's still somewhat, I think, of a new paradigm. It's not just about communicating, it's in terms of being warned or receiving information, being able as an individual to call for help, but it's also about being located within the building during an emergency. And so, I think I feel really great about the fact that we've assembled this group here in New York City. New York City is certainly one of the epicenters of innovation around public safety and advancements. And so this discussion, we will inherently talk about what public safety means in the indoor space. We're going to wrestle with a number of topics today. We're going to wrestle with codes. We're going to talk about standards, technologies. We're going to talk about infrastructure, other types of advancements. How does the ecosystem engage? How do the municipalities and AHJs, how do they fit into public safety? There are a lot of moving parts and pieces, and so we're going to spend some of our time today talking about that. We're also going to really tap into this knowledge base and talk about best practices. And of course, we're going to want to hear from you as well. But we've got this very multi-dimensional panel here today that consists of a municipality in Jouannelle. We've got an industry organization focused on safer buildings, the Safer Buildings Coalition, John Foley, my friend. We've got an OEM in Microlab with Dino, Giordano. We've got a systems integrator in Ron Schnater, and we've got really test and measurement, the standards. How do you measure the effectiveness and benchmark things with my friend Gregg Toback from Anritsu. So as I said, we want to hear from you. We're gonna check in with you a couple times during the session. We're not just going to park questions at the end of the session. I think it would be real helpful just to do a quick show of hands to understand who's in the room from a stakeholder perspective. It always helps us to know, and our panel as well to know. So just a quick show of hands of people from the commercial real estate, the building side of things. From carriers, some OEMs, probably the systems integrators and distributors. Perfect. Anybody else that I'm not that I'm not thinking about? Well, perfect. And I just want to comment on one final housekeeping thing. Those who have seen John Foley present before know that John likes to get up and walk around. He'll talk about it, and he'll be down here and halfway down here and going down toward Times Square. And I think we've actually solved the problem. We've actually put some glue on the chair that he's sitting in. So I don't think he's going to be able to get up and walk around so much this time. So with that, let's just go ahead and jump right in. I wanted to start by engaging the panel to talk about what attracts you to this topic of public safety, both personally and professionally. And I'll just confess that I really got into this in about 2012. And the thing that just energizes me about this topic, about public safety, is just the willingness for typically people we compete with from all different walks of life, the willingness to come together as a coalition and work together to try to solve the problem of indoor public safety communications and location. Just a few years ago, had the opportunity to publish an ebook called The Public Safety Imperative. There's some folks in the room that very generously helped out. Lori Blair, Clark Lazar, my friend Scott Gregory, formerly from my former company at Solid. Many others got involved in the industry and just jumped in and helped. And so I'd like to just start the panel discussion with just a quick word from each of the panelists on what is it that personally and professionally really engages you or gets you excited about public safety? What are you doing this for? Ron, go ahead.
I guess I'll start first. Public safety is pretty much, as I saw it, as an incredible business opportunity. Many of the people in this room actually know me, have met me, especially being in the New York region, being an integrator and everything else. About 4 years ago, I saw this freight train coming down the tracks. Part of it was because one of the large buildings we're putting cellular DAS in also we were required to install a public safety system in the building. At the time, and if you have to understand what New York is, there was an acronym known as ARCS. I never heard of ARCS. I had to look it up, Google it, try to figure out what the hell is ARCS. So when I understood what it was, I saw there was nobody in the New York marketplace doing this. I'm like, the aha moment hit me. I'm like, we could actually help save people, continue doing what I've always done, which is actually continue being an integrator. But at the same time, while I'm an integrator, I'm attacking a brand new market and helping people and saving lives with that.
Well, honestly, I don't know if it's it might sound corny or naive. It's really the feeling I was helping the good guys. I mean, I've been consulting for more than 15 years in the wireless industry, and globally for operators and vendors, and helping people to connect. And I was happy doing that. And one day I did a project in the district for a public safety system, and when I did it, when it was done, a firefighter called me and to thank me, say, we're scared to get into this tunnel. Now we're good. Thank you for your hard work. And I felt that there was another compelling thing for me to do work, and the reward to me was much greater than helping two kids sitting on the same bench next to each other.
Great. Dino.
Well, I'll start off professionally. I did my first public safety enhancement in 2000. That's when I found inherent that fire engine red is going to be the color of choice. So I've been doing public safety enhancement for a long time. So it's been near and dear to my heart, and always try to push venues more with the concentration of public safety. So personally, it's great to know that you're actually helping out municipalities, emergency services with the work that you do. So. You get a professional gain from seeing your product out there, and then you get a personal gain knowing that it's helping the men and women, help the public safety services.
Thanks for asking. And Mike, you promised us you were going to sit on the edge of the stage. So professionally, I was working at a large integrator that did a lot of cellular DAS, and I was faced with decreasing spend from the carriers and a mission to try to monetize enterprise for in-building systems. And I saw two opportunities there. One was fire codes that require that these systems go in, and the other was something that was looming on the horizon, a new thing called FirstNet. And I saw them both as drivers. That turned out to be true. Personally, I come from a law enforcement family, which leads to a lot of kidding from the fire department people that I work with. Our executive director is fond of asking the room who here is from law enforcement. I'll ask, is there anybody in here from law enforcement? Nobody, just my family. And then he'll finish up by saying, if you'd done better on the test, you could have been fireman. Anyway, so my grandfather was a cop, his brother was a cop, my brother was a cop, and my son is a Philadelphia sworn officer wearing my brother's badge. And he almost lost his life one day because of a dispatch error where the garbled communications sent them to the wrong street. He wound up in hand-to-hand combat with a very bad man on very bad drugs with a gun for 8 minutes. And if you think 8 minutes is a short amount of time, try to do anything for 8 minutes. And the old guys over there, don't take that the wrong way. Anyway, he laughed. It's very personal to me.
Thanks, John.
Mike, so the aha moment for me was customer frustration. It was about 7 years ago. I'm doing a training for a customer who said standards are the most important thing for me to do. Small municipality in the Midwest. Just went to P25 and they were talking about narrowbanding. At the end of the training, the customer said, thank you, this is a fantastic training. I learned a lot today. My follow-up to them was, well, what did you learn that you'll do differently? And the manager said, well, we're still going to pick up our cell phone when we really need to talk to each other. It was at that moment I realized the two-way communications works the way it's designed in a particular vertical, but go outside of that vertical and nothing worked. My follow-on question was, why do you say you want to pick up your cell phone? I said, because everything works fine until we go downstairs in the basement. That was the aha moment for me that said, we have a great business opportunity and a great personal opportunity to affect people's lives and better them by increasing the public safety enhancements and communications and response time.
Great. Perfect. Well, thank you. So let's jump in. I'd like to hear some perspectives on what's changed in public safety from an indoor perspective, whether it be communications, connectivity, or location. You know, what's changed over the last 3 to 5 years? Public safety has been on a lot of these agendas. We've talked a lot about it, but what progress has been made? Guy, from a municipality perspective, I'd like to start with you and hear what's changed in public safety in your eyes?
Well, the biggest change is that in the district and in a lot of jurisdictions, there's a mandate for new buildings to provide emergency frequencies coverage. So that was not a task that was, on the list of our tasks. So additional work for us. I don't know if you went to DC recently, but wherever you look at, there are cranes because the city is building up significantly. And the system that are installed, the DAS that are installed, if they're not installed properly, they interfere with our network. So it's another additional increase in our workload that we had difficulties to face. So that's what happened to us the last 3 years. The mandate dates from 2015.
Okay. So Ron, I'd like to bring you in to comment on this because you and Guy see the world, the requirement is somewhat different. There's some similarities, but some differences as well in terms of the code. But as an integrator, how have you seen public safety? What's changed? What's been significant for you over the last 3 to 5 years?
I'm going to really start talking about, we started our solutions about 2.5 years ago. So that's the plug on about the company. But more importantly, that's really when New York started changing a lot. So I look at everything on a much more myopic, a much tighter point of view. And looking in the New York metropolitan area, we'll start talking about things like FirstNet and how data interacts and everything else. But in New York, we don't know anything about that. The fire department has codes. They're saying that their fire department's two-way radio systems have to work inside buildings. And any new building that's over 75 feet tall has to have a system that works. New building, I should say, with that. So what's made it kind of exciting is, and we talked about when Guy just brought up cranes and everything else, there's a ton of cranes going on in the New York City area. And that includes New Jersey, Long Island, Westchester, places like that as well. But our focus is not really on making sure everything works. It's really about the fire department and making sure firemen to firemen are able to speak to each other. That's really been my life for the past 2.5 years.
Okay, so I think your mic's sort of cutting in and out a little bit. So if it gets bad, perhaps you and Guy can share going forward. But John, so as a members organization, with the thesis, the focus of how to make buildings safer. What sort of progress have you seen, given from your view and your member your members' views? I mean, what's changed? Are buildings getting safer?
Buildings are getting safer. So we did a survey in the fall of 2017 with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and we got a lot of responses from the actual code officials around the country. And we asked them, are you implementing and enforcing these codes? These are NFPA codes, International Fire Codes, that specify that these booster systems will repeat first responder systems, radio systems inside buildings. 42% of the jurisdictions reported that they're enforcing some version of the code, whether it be the national code or their own local version of it. And that percentage is increasing. Our membership is probably another indicator. In 2017, we had 11 members. This month, we got our 53rd member. And some very large companies are joining. Also, organizations, real estate organizations like CBRE and large universities have joined. So we've seen that as a change. The other thing is FirstNet has come on full strong. AT&T has come to recognize that if FirstNet, and for those of you who don't know what FirstNet is, it's the national broadband public safety network that was put into being by Congress in 2012. And it actually came into being and is being deployed right now by AT&T. They now understand that FirstNet needs to be available inside buildings. And so those two drivers are coming to fruition, and it is pushing people to understand that these systems need to go in. A side benefit of that is property developers and owners that were on the fence about putting cellular reinforcement in now are being required to put public safety or life safety radio in, and sometimes you get some synergy between the two systems, so it's knocked some of those off the fence, and they're starting to get put in too. So there's collateral benefit to these systems going in.
So Gregg, from just a test and measurements perspective, what are you seeing? Are buildings getting safer? I mean, are you seeing notable progress?
What we're seeing in the trends in new buildings, new constructions and retrofits is validity and a plan to continue validating the system is functioning well. Probably the biggest difference over the past 3 years is going from a can you hear me now in a grid where somebody might take one test where they key up a radio, and if it works in a grid of 25 feet by 25 feet, we consider that adequate. Where fast forward to today, you have AHJs that are saying, no, we need a full digital solution that can take multiple measurements a second, because that first responder isn't going to be in the one 25-foot by 25-foot grid spot. They could be anywhere within the grid. So the improvements we're seeing are twofold. One is the frequency and the accuracy of measurements that are taken, and the other is repeatability, building audits. 2 years ago, we didn't hear realtors say, or realty owners say that we have to have an audit every year because the AHJ requires it. Now we're hearing that audits are required, and the audit's going to be scheduled for such and such a date. And they take the data that was prepared at the time the building went live and compare it to the data that they take on an annual basis. So a corrective action can be put into place to continue to improve the building safety.
And Dino, I want to hear from you on what gaps are you seeing? So, I mean, you've been around public safety in your current role in other organizations, and so you've been doing this for a while. I mean, what gaps are you seeing? What still needs to be addressed?
Well, now being particular RF plumbing, so we're the passive infrastructure. We're taking that signal and we're putting it throughout buildings to enhance it and getting it to, the emergency services. I'm seeing a level of how is this infrastructure going to be monitored, and can we know the heartbeat all the time? Because what happens is you commission these systems, and Gregg says about they doing audits. Now they're requiring audits. Well, they do them annually. Now what happens if they do their audit and in 40 days something happens to the infrastructure? How do they know that something's wrong with it? If there's an event that happens, they can't go into that event and find out that my communication system isn't working. So the challenge on our side is we're on a passive side, bringing that signal to there, is how can you accurately model and monitor that to make sure the integrity of the infrastructure is always intact every day. So, we're bringing at Microlab, bringing smarts to our passives, so try to bring some intelligence to the passive infrastructure. So there is some kind of reporting back to a central location to saying that, hey, your system's still good beyond an annual check.
Okay. So I want to agitate a little bit here between DC and New York. And I'm specifically interested in, you've got, there are certain states, there are certain municipalities that are really making advances, that are really leading public safety. And I kind of look at DC, and of course FirstNet's headquartered out in Reston. It's the nation's capital, and then of course New York. And I'm just curious to hear, do you view the District of Columbia and New York City as really those sort of preeminent standards bearers for progress in public safety? And how do they compare? How do they contrast? What other states or municipalities do you see as really raising the bar?
To tell the truth, that's one of the reasons why I come to those venues. Is I don't know really what the other municipalities or states are doing. I know that working through the Safer Building Coalition, I know that Florida seems to have some step forward, but I don't know at all what's happening in New York City. So.
Okay.
Is this a little better now?
It is.
Okay, perfect. It's actually, what I find so mind-blowing with New York is how antiquated I find the municipalities are in working with the integrators and the systems and everything else. Today, they really view fire alarm companies, electricians, as the people that oversee public safety systems. What I find what scares me today, and part of that down the road, we'll be able to handle more and more of that, but for mission critical communication, especially when it comes for the two-way radio systems, no one's making sure that these systems are really working, one, are being designed correctly. They're not making sure they're being installed correctly. And then the worst part of all is the testing, the monitoring, and maintenance that I'm like, do you go by Dino or Don? That Dino brought up. That's really not being overseen either. I think the great part about New York is they know they have this, there's a learning curve here. And I think if we come back, and I heard the presentation before this, when I said, how are things going to look 5 years from now? They'll have this figured out. They have some really smart people there in working at the fire departments, and they'll have that, and they'll know, I'm pretty sure the buildings will have pretty good public safety systems installed. But today, I think it's going to be a big learning curve. And unfortunately, if there are any landlords in the room, I don't mean to sound like a downer right now, and I don't know if this is also happening in DC as well, but these buildings are not going to get approved. They're not going to be designed correctly, and I think there's going to be a lot of heartburn until these systems are made correctly and can work really well.
So, John, you shared earlier you're on the road 70% of the time, and Chief Perdue, the director of Safer Buildings Coalition. What are you guys doing? What are you seeing out there? What progress is being made? What states or municipalities really are raising the bar, and how are you addressing some of these gaps?
It's interesting. DC and New York couldn't be any more different. They're almost polar opposites, and I'm saying that respectfully. The perspective at New York City in the ARC system is to repeat 2 channels of the fire department radio system, end of story, and it's not an on all the time system. So it's a very narrowly focused thing that only addresses one of the first, EMS is fire in New York City, so it takes care of 2, but there's nothing for law enforcement or other agencies. One of the challenges in DC is they've got all these alphabet soup agencies there, all these 3-letter agencies, and some of the manufacturers are actually challenged in delivering product that'll work in DC because you have so many different channels that you need to cover there. So they take all those channel plans into account. So those are 2 examples. Leading states would be certainly Florida. Florida will be implementing a requirement for existing buildings to be covered by these systems by 2022. California is way out in front. Texas, Colorado, an amazing section of the northeast part of the country, and places you'd be surprised, places in Ohio and Atlanta, Georgia, are very forward-thinking. So what we're doing to address that is a lot of grassroots education by getting on the road and doing a lot of local training. What needs to happen is something that Guy and I talked about at a break, which is to begin to create a forum for code officials around the country who maybe haven't started implementing this yet, to not have to start from scratch and to work off of templates that organizations like the Office of Unified Communications in DC, they have checklists and check plans and test procedures and things like that that could be standardized. That would go a long way. But it really takes this entire industry, everybody in this room, including commercial real estate, to start to come together and solution this. This is a great start, this conversation, but there's an awful lot of work to be done.
So I want to get into two hot topic trends, one being FirstNet and one being location. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but they're kind of the elephant in the room, and something that obviously FirstNet's been a long journey, and it's been a significant impact, and will take many years, I think, to really come into fruition, particularly when you start looking at the indoor space. And then look at E911 location too. But I want to pause right now and invite any questions, any burning thoughts that anyone in the audience has at this time. I know Clark Lazar promised to give me a hard time, and I'm just going to sort of deflect that to our panel of experts. And so just wanted to invite a thought if anyone has one at this point, or go ahead. Yes, sir.
Peter Simonic from Fractal Antenna Systems. It's a little divergent from what we've been going through so far, but what are your outlook on in-building convergence between cellular and home gas?
I'll take that. Being that FirstNet, I think, is going to be the catalyst between bringing that commercial wireless and public safety together, because FirstNet is a public safety communications, but it's using a carrier technology with LTE. So I think, again, challenges right now is, from what I hear from the FirstNet team out there, is that they're having a PIM issue. And on the passive side, doing passive infrastructure, public safety never looked at passive intermods as a critical variable. So the infrastructure put in there was basically, it got things through, it was cheap and economical, where the PIM-rated, low PIM-rated stuff is a little bit more robust and more expensive. So how do you deal with existing infrastructure, new infrastructure? Is it going to be more carrier-centric, public safety-centric, or is it going to be a convergence of both? So I think there's some things that have to be defined, but FirstNet is really going to be the mold of how we see convergence of public safety and commercial wireless.
So just contributing to what you were mentioning about that integration, there's a collaborative effort between FirstNet and the states. But that collaborative effort right now stops at the states with adoption of FirstNet. So working with a local municipality, working with building owners, the biggest concerns driven by the AHJ is reliability. The PIM issues are certainly a technical facet that we're dealing with proactively, but the aspect of having 5 nines reliability on a digital radio system hasn't yet been met with FirstNet. So if you look at the trajectory of FirstNet, the ultimate objective is that it will eventually bring in, as an integration, all of the two-way public safety on an LTE robust network. But the municipalities are looking at that saying, we invested millions of dollars in a digital system 5 years ago. I can't go back to my constituent taxpayers and ask them for millions of dollars more to integrate yet another system. It's going to take some time, and the FirstNet objective, some of the graphs that I have seen, is that they're looking at 20 years before having that seamless adoption. But before we get to that point, we need adoption by the municipalities and the states, not only the states.
Actually, the district mandate the coverage of FirstNet frequencies. And if there, for any building that has also commercial DAS, we require intermode analysis and PIM measurements.
Clark.
Because I've worked on both the carrier and the public safety side, is the fact that from a convergence standpoint, with cellular, with FirstNet, it can't happen because now you're moving into that same frequency realm, and now your units, your UEs, are going to be the third watt variation. In the current configuration, it's hard to bring the two together because you have two totally different design methodologies. And so therefore, from a technical aspect, you're going to end up creating what is called receiver descents, to where the portable is not smart. So when you key it up, the entire 5 watts is hitting the remote, the front end of the remote and the antenna. And so therefore shutting out any possibility of your cellular unit getting there. I saw that when I designed New Orleans Superdome, where the cellular system, I designed it for 333 antennas to do 40 sectors. For the public safety, I did 24 antennas for the public safety. So to show you the varying disparity between the two design methodologies. And then two is an SLA issue. And so I wanted to interject that so that it would bring a level of clarity from the technical as well as an operational.
Yeah, great, thanks. I have a question over here, and John, I want to come back as a best practice a little bit, the discussion we were talking a little bit about convergence and where FirstNet, how that might usher in some of those aspects. But yes, please.
This is a fascinating conversation. In my previous life, I was one of the software architects and systems architects for Nurse Corporation, PSBC, and I did the public safety radio that's out today. And I've always wondered about this. I've always wondered about in-building coverage. And one of the major areas of tension was always between the fire group and the police group. In particular, as pertains to VHF or FM modulation versus the P25 in vocoder as it falls off for waterfall. So when you get inside of the building and you're using data, you're using digital, when it falls off immediately, it's gone. And there's no feedback. Whereas in VHF, in FM, there's a gradual decline. The fire guys know that, hey, I got a problem here, I'm losing my coverage. So how is that, what do you guys think about that? And how does that enter into your puzzle?
No doubt, law enforcement and fire use radios very differently. I mean, if you think about the tactical work that they do, a fire department shows up like a team, establishes a command center on the curb, needs communication back to the tower, and then they need to communicate with people inside. And then if they're person to person, if they lost communication, you can actually have a handset talk to another handset. It's called talk around. So there's lots of ways that they can work. Police work is frequently not like that. So not only are there cultural differences between the two groups, but there's operational difference between the two groups, and their needs are different. You know, how that relates to what happens when something like FirstNet moves in, which is a public safety communications technology that's based on commercial cellular, okay? It's more focused on data and situational awareness than voice communication. I think you're going to see the use cases get closer together. They both have a use for situational awareness. So you're going to see an evolution of technology over time that's going to start to blur the lines of those technologies. Motorola is already white labeling technology that mixes together LTE and LMR on one handset, for example. So you're going to see innovation, and these changes, market-based changes, are going to drive investment and changes in technology that are going to address the kinds of technical questions you're asking. Operationally, things are going to be stretched by the new way of thinking about first responders of the future. NIST writes a lot of good stuff about it. Go Google that stuff, by the way.
So John brought up an earlier point where some municipalities are much further ahead than others, particularly Florida and parts of Ohio, centered mostly around Columbus. If I look at those two regions, one thing they have in common is a tighter interpretation of the standards. So we have two definitions here. We've got a defined analog FM modulated radio. We have a defined digital radio. We don't measure them in the same fashion. We measure our analog radio by its received signal strength. And if it meets a certain number of dB, it's a good signal. Many of the states and municipalities are translating that long standardized adopted definition to be synonymous with a digital radio. With a digital radio, that digital fall off or cliff, the radio either works, can you hear me now? It doesn't work. There is no in between. And in Ohio and in Florida, they've recognized this, and the AHJs have pursued the tighter interpretation of NFPA 1221 and Part 72, and they've indicated on a digital system, we want to test it digitally. We don't just want to see the delivered audio quality, which is a number that the AHJ can define between 1 and 5. It's very subjective. But rather, they're saying on the digital system, give us an actual value in bit error rate. And that's something that needs to be adopted on a much larger scale if we're going to be successful with a hybridized system that combines and integrates seamlessly FirstNet with P25 or FirstNet with NXDN or DMR.
Great, thank you. So I want to, as we start winding down here, get into some best practice. I want to hear from, because we've got this very diverse group of experts. I want to hear about some best practices. Maybe I'd even contrast it to, perhaps some of the worst ideas that you've heard floated around in your travels. And so, I'd like to start from a municipality perspective with Guy once again. What have you learned? How have perhaps your perspective changed? Or, if you want to go the other way, what's some of the worst ideas that you've heard floated out there?
What will change is that, so unfortunately, a few years back, the district had several interference issues on their network due to BDAs or DAS that were not properly set up. Issues like, half of the frequencies across the city were shut down for more than a week. Somebody pushing the emergency button could not talk afterwards. And that's what we realized was that it was mainly due to poor engineering or failing equipment, mostly poor engineering for some of the integrators. So we defined a process that controls the design and testing process. So somebody has a new building, design a DAS system, submit it to the district, review the design, look at the link budgets, the coverage, how many antennas, all of this to make sure this is going to work. And then they implement it, and then we test it. We have a process that the integrator knows about. He knows how we're going to test it. And then we have an annual testing of the sites. And then we, at the end of the acceptance test, we issue an authorization to transmit under the frequencies that we're licensed to. And in this letter, we explain that they need to do this annual testing and explain the conditions for them to keep this authorization. If they don't, then this is non-compliant with the fire code, and so they just need to comply, or they get fined or something.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like that kind of dovetails into a little bit of what Gregg's organization does. So I'm going to jump down and invite you in and give you the same opportunity to either expand upon it or go another direction.
I'm going to start with the worst case situation.
I love it. Excellent.
And this truly did happen. It was about 3 years ago. It was a brand new digital public safety system in a 80,000 square foot municipal office building. The specifications called for one measurement inside of each grid. There were 25 by 25 grids. The fire marshal provided a single control channel for 9 hours. 75,000 square foot building. One person was responsible for keying up the radio to make sure that there was good downlink signal. If there was good downlink signal and I can hear you, that was a good grid. 75,000 square foot building, less than 1 full day to test the entire grid. And by the way, each measurement was written down on a notebook. So we have a couple of issues here. Trust. Who verified the information? How did one person test a 75,000 square foot building in the course of one business day? So we fast forward. The system was commissioned. It was accepted. The CO was given. There was a fire a year later. Thank the good Lord, nobody was hurt. But the fire affected property. The alarm system worked correctly. The extinguishers came on. But when the responders went in, they did not know exactly where to go because the alarm system was gridded out by floor, not by sector. So there were a few errors made in the interest of expediency. And I look at that and say, okay, how does that contrast with what we do today? So what we try to do today is we try to look for repeatability. We try to prove out the concept that if there is something, that when the alarm goes off, I have grid information that is real, that I can go to the area where the fire exists. Interesting enough, when the building was renovated, somewhat uncoincidental, all the fire codes had changed. They took 12 readings per grid. They didn't do it on a spreadsheet anymore. They actually had a spectrum analyzer recorded on a map. Why? To prove out that the concept is valid. So everything is date stamped. They proved out that stairwells had coverage. They didn't test stairwells before because all they could do was walk in, key up a radio at the bottom of the stair, in the middle, and the top. Well, now we had more valid measurements. So just sharing that for any of you that are involved in scenarios, there was a worst case scenario where thankfully no one got hurt when there was a fire, but it created a behavior shift, not only by the AHJ, but also by the municipality because they introduced all new codes within a year, and those codes are still being enforced today. So we'd like to think as a test company, our goal is to validate, and validation needs to be proven. And it's very difficult to prove that when you have limitations like 9 hours on one control channel or write the number in on a spreadsheet.
So let me invite Ron in here because again, this is another one of the guys that are going in and designing these things and getting it done. Briefly share again any best advice for this audience that is increasingly being involved in these types of projects.
Absolutely.
What have you learned?
Well, it's kind of funny. When I first started with really getting involved with public safety, I'm like, okay, the design is vital, and we need a design. You know what? Nothing's changed with having a great design for a system, because when we hit those grids, we need to know that when we go to that the sound, we're going to have the right dB levels, the right quality of sound at each grid throughout the building. But that was one piece. The second piece was having rock-solid electronics in the building as well. And like going, okay, we can make sure we make them, we can purchase them, everything else, and we do actually manufacture our own equipment as well, and I can guarantee the equipment works. So now I have a great design, great equipment, but there was a problem still, and it's the installation. And this goes back to where Gregg and everyone's talking about is, and I think everyone tends to forget about this, it's the testing. Yes, we could do all the grid testing we want and everything else in the world, but most people do not, and it's not from the wireless world, most people do not want to test the cables. And we need companies like Anritsu to make sure that all the cables have been swept well. We CW test, and we know that the system that we designed, the equipment that we use, the passive equipment that are in the system, all work the way we think they're going to work from the beginning and actually execute and work the exact same way at the end of the day. And when you talk about what's the best feeling about being part of public safety and everything else, it's at the last day when we test the whole system and we find out that the system actually really works the way we think it's going to work. And it's great when it's a 50,000-foot building or 75,000-foot building, but it's really super exciting right now when it's like a 1.5 million square foot building. And you want to know something? If we do each of those little parts well, we can make sure that both the 85 or the 55,000 square foot building, which have a lot more margin of error, work just as well as the 1.5 million square foot buildings.
So in the final 30 seconds, I'd like to ask both Dino and John to jump in on just what are we going to be talking about in 3 years? You know, we bring this panel back together. What's going to be the hot topic that we're talking about? Dino, what's on your mind? What are we going to be talking about?
I think we'll be back to the convergence because, you know, in 3 years, we're going to have FirstNet is going to start to get deployed. Once it actually gets deployed, then we're going to find out what are the shortcomings, you know, on the in-building side. You know, what kind of challenges do we need to address? So again, it's all going to come back to where are the municipalities with their communication systems? Are they still going to keep their old VHF simplex systems and correlate the FirstNet along with that? Or is it going to be convergence now in 3 years? The FirstNet data capabilities are now going to include voice. Can we do, you know, rip and replaces and whatnot? So I think it's going to be where do we stand with our infrastructure and our technology to giving a plan onto having a full voice and data public safety system in building.
That makes sense. John, I'll give you the last word.
So you know the story about the dog that chases the car and what happens when the dog catches the car? What's he going to do with it? In 3 years, you guys are going to have more business than you know what to do with. We're early on in this conversation. We're at the front end of the bell curve. There's over 6 million buildings in this country that are commercial real estate buildings. Majority of them have no in-building coverage. And both from a cellular and a public safety standpoint, you need it. Okay? Landlines are going away. Younger people are coming into the market and will sign leases. They're going to demand it. And this industry, as it is currently constituted, does not have the scale to satisfy the demand. Just a quick show of hands. 6 million roughly buildings. If 1% of the buildings, if I had a check in my hand right now for 1% of the buildings, 60,000 buildings, and my only requirement of you was that they all had to get done in 12 months, who here could do 60,000 buildings? Raise your hand. The guy, we got a spot for you, yeah, anyway. This industry has to scale. That is the news.
Okay, thank you. Just a final round of applause for our panel of experts here. I do encourage you, please, these are the smart guys when it comes to public safety. Please talk to them at the break that's coming up now, I think. No break. Oh, well, yeah. So if you're going to throw something, throw it at Steve. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.